All right. Thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, sure. So let's maybe, for the ones who don't know, AI EU Act, what is it? Why is it happening? Just a short, brief introduction. Maybe we can start with you since you're amidst all the storm and negotiations that's happening right now.
Yeah. So the European Union started with the idea of regulating AI really long time ago, already in 2014, and it's also based on international cooperation, international fora like OECD and so on and so on. And there, again, was a lot of prep work that led to the AI white paper in 2020, which was a kind of outlook how the idea of regulating AI in the EU could look like, and the AI Act is heavily based on it, with the general objective to strike the right balance between promoting innovation in AI, but also establishing the right safeguards in order to protect fundamental rights and other things. And yeah, as you said, we are now at the very end, maybe, of the negotiations. So maybe at the end of this year, we will have a political deal, and then the AI Act would enter into force next summer, probably.
All right. So before we go on, just a quick reminder. Of course, you can ask questions on your app to anyone, and I will relay them to the speakers. So feel free to take out your app and also ask the questions. Carlos, you were previously working on Hugging Face. Your job, maybe, how would you summarize it into one sentence there?
Yeah, I was basically leading regulatory policies and everything related to also AI governance with a specific focus on regulation and, of course, the EU AI Act.
So because there's a lot of people who run their own companies, there's a lot of people who will be starting companies here, and I guess Hugging Face, that's the company which sells, well, not sells, but provides, let's put it this way, AI models. How would that impact anyone who's working with AI here, the new AI Act, do you think?
Yeah, I think that, so there have been a lot of discussions these past months when it comes to the impact of the EU AI Act on startups, but also European small and middle companies. A lot of them are even very afraid, right? So they have a hard time understanding how to cope or deal with this kind of heavy, long text. Now, I think for these type of companies, especially for startups, the EU AI Act deserves a deep dive from their side, even though you or they are not experts, really. Just spend some time going through it. You will realize that for some very specific startups or even micro enterprises, it is not applicable, let's say it like this. So you really have to deep dive just a bit. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that you also have to think potentially about the return on investment, because if you comply with the AI Act, the main also economic theory behind is that, for instance, if you're going to invest a lot of time, money, or human resources certifying potentially one of your high-risk AI systems, then of course this will be also translated into a return on investment if you, for instance, increase the price of your specific service or product because it is compliant already, right, with this type of regulation. So this is just an overview of the potential leverage for startups and SMEs.
So there was, when this AI Act started being talked about, there was a lot of people drawing parallels with GDPR. Of course, everyone I think here is more or less aware of all the benefits it brought, but also all the drawbacks and also all the overhead that it brought to companies, especially small companies that had a very hard time following up on really what's happening and spending a lot of resources into just diving into the legals, which was hard. Do you think that there's a danger that the same thing will happen with AI Act, or?
I will say yes and no and explain both. So yes, there is a danger because the AI Act is, again, Carlos was already mentioning it a little bit, is of course a huge compliance task for those companies. If you are being placed in the high risk category, you need in the future to fulfill technical documentation, transparency, human oversight. The big issue there is that maybe, or again, as I said, the AI Act is heavily based on international agreements, prep work, and so on. So the concepts per se, like non-discrimination and so on, most people or everyone is agreeing on. But the problem in the AI Act is it has very general rules, and it's not really clear how to translate those general rules in different sectors transport, health, and so on and so on. And also, even within the sectors, of course, the use cases differ very much. And this will be one of the big challenges that you are confronted with. You need to establish a stop button in your AI system, but maybe it's even dangerous to have a stop button. There are a few use cases. This, I think, will be the main challenge for especially smaller market players. And similar to the GDPR, in the first years, we are very sure, especially on conservative and liberal side in the parliament, that there will be, again, legal uncertainty. National competent authorities, so the enforcement bodies, will have different interpretations and so on. So yes, there will be a GDPR 2.0 problem, but and Carlos maybe can say more about it after I finished. There are also a few improvements, I would say, kind of lesson learned from GDPR. One of the biggest factor, and Sebastian Heinsleben from Zenner is always mentioning it, and he's right, the AI Act has Article 40, and Article 40 gives a presumption of conformity if you as a company fulfill or build your product based on a technical standard. So with that, it's rather easy to be compliant in the end. Of course, the standard needs to be there. If the standard is there in time, no one knows. And the second point, and there Carlos can definitely talk more about, is regulatory sandboxes. They were also introduced in the AI Act. And well, it's depending on the funding, on the member states, how they will establish them. But the concept is rather nice, especially for startups, because they could enter in a really close dialogue with the enforcement bodies, with the national competent authorities, and really learn from each other and make the system better.
Mm-hmm. Carlos, I think you had several cues to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, just to deep dive on these two things that, in my opinion, also I agree with Kai, startups or small and medium companies can hugely leverage as a competitive also differentiator. So you don't have to conceive the EUA Act just as a compliance burden, but also as a competitive leverage, because probably if you comply before your competitor, you are probably getting into the market before your competitor. And the AI standards and sandboxes are two clear examples. Standards, as such, as you may know, are just this kind of set of technical specifications describing how you should implement a very specific either feature or regulatory compliance mechanism. Right, so within the EU's and Senelec is driving all this initiative when it comes to AI standards. As a startup or even small and medium company, the main challenge of standard compliance is also interpretation, and sometimes the standards are very heavy. For European SMEs, it is not impossible, but at the same time, probably it's not easy to get access to this type of technical discussions when it comes to the development of the standard, right? So I think this is still nowadays a challenge to improve a bit. And then you have regulatory sandboxes. And basically the nice or cool thing about regulatory sandboxes is that basically the authority is providing you this kind of platform where both authority and the market come together to discuss very specific technical features of AI and the related interpretation with the regulation. And why? Because basically the regulation and some specific provisions are going to need a lot of interpretation. And these clarifications or interpretation needs to come from a collaborative approach between the regulator and the market. So I think on this theme, regulatory sandboxes are like the perfect fit.
Okay. And can you give a quick example of how a company would use these regulatory sandboxes?
Yeah, so I think one clear example, and now for those who don't know, the Spanish Secretary of State for AI and Digitalization wants really to push for the first European AI regulatory sandbox, even prior to the setting of the EUA Act, just to serve as a first testing framework. And there, the focus could be, for instance, high-risk AI systems, right? How do you deal with a high-risk AI system? What's the process of testing this very specific high-risk AI system? Not just the AI system as such from a holistic perspective, so the product itself, but also probably the components of it. If the high-risk AI system could be also conceived as a general purpose AI system because it is made of one or even several foundation models or large language models, right? How do we, or myself as the developer of this system, engage with the authority because I have some very specific gaps when it comes to the interpretation of some of the provision or some of the definitions. And from the authority's perspective, you are going also to have these kind of doubts. Okay, from a technical perspective, we quite not get this product feature, and we would like to engage to see if we could even clarify the interpretation of some specific articles.
Okay, and yeah.
Maybe just to complement 2-3 points. We in the parliament, we wanted to even make the benefits for smaller market players bigger in sandboxes, especially if you pass all the process and in the end you are at least partially compliant on those things that you have tested there. Together, we wanted to provide the company with, again, a presumption of conformity. Unfortunately, member states and commission pushed back a lot because they also got pushback from existing notification bodies and so on. They saw this as maybe threat to their business and so on. So again, a money problem. But well, at the end, a typical European compromise was found. There will be an exit report after, again, you, for example, tested your compliance with human oversight obligations or something like this. And then with this exit report, you can go to a notifying body, for example, TÜV in Germany. And this notifying body will already be informed before when you are in the sandbox and after you are in a fast track proceeding. So if everything works in the end in those sandboxes, this could really help companies to being able to place their product much faster on the market. And maybe one thing that also compared to the initial proposal from the Commission is now a bit better, liability. A lot of especially smaller market players were hugely concerned that they are testing on something in the sandbox, but then suddenly because of a data protection violation, they are becoming liable. There we also made some improvements. If you're following the so-called sandbox plan that you are negotiating with the enforcement bodies, then you are fine, even though you are doing certain things maybe wrong in this testing period. You cannot do some illegal stuff there. This is, of course, also true, but at least companies have a little bit more flexibility. And the third concern that we also addressed a little bit, but then it depends a lot on national authorities, like the one in Spain. Companies are very, very afraid about intellectual property rights and trade secrets. Sandboxes would have the opportunity to also join forces, to work together on common projects and so on. But I think for that, we made improvements in the text, but I think the member states really need to clarify how they are testing certain things, what is happening with the knowledge that those experts are getting from those tests. I guess we need a lot of NDAs and other things in order to give companies enough security to really trust in a regulatory sandbox.
Okay, so I want to jump to another thing, just to jump on something you said. You talked about high-risk use of AI. Maybe could you clarify? Is this already something that will be defined in the AIEU Act, or how does it?
Yeah. So this is actually a good question because we are currently discussing it, and we had a breakthrough last Friday after a 7-hour meeting. Again, no lunch for all of us. It was a long time problem. The Commission basically proposed this risk permit with the uppest level prohibitions and then high-risk AI systems. And after that, AI systems with some transparency requirements and then no risk. And of course, from the beginning, it was very disputed how you define what in the top category and the second category is. In the second category, the Commission proposed just a list of high-risk use cases. And I hope no one from the Commission is there. In my opinion, in the opinion from many other people, this list of high-risk use cases was not so good. There were a lot of sectors like employment that definitely pose a lot of high-risk use cases or entail, but also a lot of use cases there are not necessarily posing in high risk. And therefore, what we now in the end have in the final AI Act, at least it's looking like this, is you have the list of high-risk use cases in Annex 3. Again, there's a presumption that you are high risk, but then there is a kind of self-assessment that is double-checked by national competent authorities. And in the self-assessment, companies are checking, do I really pose, even though I'm falling under Annex 3, a significant risk to create harm? And for example, do I materially influencing the decision-making of the human being, and so on and so on. And then there are 4 criteria, and if you fulfill one of those criteria, you are exceptionally not high risk. And with this approach, it's very difficult, which also requires additional guidelines and guidance and so on, but at least it will enable. My stupid example is always critical infrastructure is point number 2 in the list of high risk. And a Coca-Cola machine driven by AI, I don't think something like this exists, but if it would exist, it would fall under high risk because the cola machine is in a nuclear power plant. In the future, because this is one of the criteria that it has just a supporting function, it would be out. So this is how the AI Act will probably go.
All right, that's interesting. I don't know if you want to add anything on this.
So I think from my side, also when I was working on Hugging Face, and even prior to Hugging Face, I was part of Big Science, which was an open collaborative research project where we developed the first large language model on an open and collaborative basis. We were like more than 1,000 researchers all over the world. We received a grant from the French government, 3 million euros grant in terms of supercomputing hours to train this kind of big model. And we think, and this is just a tangent, nice, I think, anecdote, we considered open sourcing this LLM. And by open sourcing, I mean with an official OSI approved open source license. So in this case, we initially considered the Apache 2.0 license, but then we had as a community concerns on how potentially the public or the users were going to use this large language model, and we had, of course, potential concerns when it comes to misuses of this large language model. So we started to work on a new type of license, which basically enables open access to this kind of model, but at the same time sets a specific set of use restrictions, right? So for instance, you cannot use the model to provide medical advice or medical results interpretation because it is a pre-trained model and therefore it is not fine-tuned or narrowed down to a very specific medical-related task, right? And this goes in line with the EUA Act because back even in the version of 2021 and later papers and reports, we based some of our restrictions on some of the high-risk identified systems, but also, for instance, on other related provisions such as Article 52. Article 52 deals with transparency. So for instance, we were forced, we wanted to include an obligation or a requirement, which is you cannot use the model without intelligibly disclaiming that the output is generated by a model. So for you, it might seem, super obvious, right? For my grandmother or my mother, it is not so obvious, right? And these are, at the end of the day, the end consumers of these kind of potential applications. And we basically use the EUA Act back in the days for this, basically, to inform also our governance tools already.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and maybe just a bit connected, and this is also a question from the audience, is how can we actually protect ourselves as a society from this malicious use of AI? Is AU Act the start of it, or is there anything else we could be doing? I don't know if it's too high-level question for you.
No, I think the AI Act lays down really important ground rules. Even my political group, which is sometimes a bit critical, and we are always afraid about hampering innovation and so on and so on. I think the other side in the parliament and also the commission has made a lot of good proposals. And this now on a personal level also, I do agree with several concerns, from example, from the Greens and so on. And I think the AI Act in the end strikes, as if it's staying like it's now, a rather good balance and will help, for example, when it comes to data governance, when it comes to transparency, when it comes to to technical documentation and so on, will create a situation where maybe even the world is becoming a little bit fairer, because one example that I'm always using, if I got rejected from a university, I never know why, and I never get an explanation. In the future, and this was a Green and Social Democrat proposal, again, on a personal level that I very much support, you would have the chance to ask the university, in this case, why you got rejected and how AI was playing a role. And due to this transparency, you would find out in the end maybe that you got rejected because you were coming from Lisbon, and people here in Porto do not like that very much, for example. So this would basically help to detect bias much better. And then again, we have also, this is now the high risk level. We also have, Carlos mentioned it already, Article 52, transparency. This is still in discussion, or didn't really start the discussion, but very likely there will be strong transparency obligations in the direction of labeling AI-generated content, even though we need to be careful because there's no really clear label right now, but I think there will be some high-level obligations in it, and those two things will help a lot. But on top, we need to invest much, much more money in digital skills, in education, and so on, because you cannot do everything in a law. It also needs to start here. And Carlos was saying a good example. It's lifelong learning. It's really that our grandmothers and our parents and so on, my kid and others, they need to learn, they need to become better in identifying risks, some malicious actors that are trying to trick them, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I don't know if you want to add anything, or you're good. Yeah. But let's take also maybe a question from the audience. This one has already a lot of votes. So the AI landscape is also evolving so quickly. How are the regulators adapting to keep up the pace of the change? I think you get probably this question a lot. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I can start. So my experience at Hugging Face, and even again when I was a PhD researcher in Munich at the Max Planck, and then joining Big Science. So from April 2021, we got the first draft of proposal of the EU AI Act with this high risk, the concept of high risk AI systems. And then month after month, the discussions started to appear. I joined Hugging Face, and then one day we didn't have just high-risk AI systems, but also another concept, which was general-purpose AI systems. And then we had also foundation models. And then, so we've been seeing how basically the regulator, or the policymakers in Europe, have been trying to adapt to this kind of huge pace of innovation when it comes to AI. So for instance, when I was at Hugging Face, I was there when we hosted for the first time Stable Diffusion. I think it was back in the first week of August. And I think no one basically was anticipating this huge impact, for instance, of this very specific model, right? Stable Diffusion. Then it happened the same with ChatGPT. So of course, from the eyes also of the regulator, it's a massive challenge for them, and they cannot imagine how straightforward it should be every single week having to basically conceive or negotiate new provisions because a new huge LLM or foundation model was already in the market.
I need to say, I always love this question because even though sometimes I'm very critical with EU policy making there, I think we also learned from past mistakes. So again, from certain things that with GDPR were not working well and so on. The EU legislator is becoming more and more principle-based. And this, again, was already a little bit in the GDPR, but now much more in the AI Act. And we as Parliament made it even stronger by saying in Article 8 that all the high-risk obligations should only apply in a very general way and should not be understood literally. Going back to my stop button example, as I said, it doesn't make sense, for instance, if you have an eye surgery performed by a robot, because this robot is already much better than the human being. If you are allowing the doctor to interfere, the number of accidents is skyrocketing. So This would mean then in the end, based on the standards, based on guidelines, that even though it's a general principle, it's only applying to, 80% of the high-risk AI cases. And with this approach, the EU legislator is probably making the law a bit more future-proof. Another point that you could have seen with the DSA and DMA approach, which I also like very much, GDPR had, as a result, created a situation that big tech, US big tech, was having a field day because their competition was struggling with compliance with the GDPR, while they struggle too, but they can pay the fine no matter what, and they manage much easier. Now with this new DSA, DMA approach, especially the DSA, that has tougher rules for a small number of powerful digital gatekeepers, I think we are also going in a good direction. It's similar to risk-based approach that we are really focusing in different ways on those problems. And I think those two things combined with our more and more stronger focus on standards, harmonized standards, I think makes us in the end future-proof, because otherwise, as the question is completely true, the legislator is always
one step behind.
Exactly, because the developments are so fast that Carlos is saying, we are now talking about a certain technology, and then maybe we are coming to a political deal in December. Then there's a transition period of 2 years, and in 2 years, who knows, there is maybe not even foundation models anymore.
You already start working on a new legislation.
Exactly, and this we really want to prevent.
All right. And maybe, so that's already a lot of votes on this one as well. Can you also give some concrete examples of what exactly is in the act? So like really examples of what will be the obligations or what you're looking, maybe I can throw it a bit to you, but I think both of you can talk about it.
Yeah, of course. I think one of the most recent ones, and I'm sure Kai has a lot more insights on this, is Article 28, which basically focuses on foundation models, right? So on the big models that are the main trend nowadays, specifically either from the proprietary LLM developers such as OpenAI or Anthropic or Cohere, but also from the open source community, such as, for instance, Hugging Face is one example, or even Stability with Stable Diffusion could be another example, right? So if you are developing these kind of foundation models and you are releasing them or even commercializing them, you are going to face very specific obligations, right? One of them, sub-obligation, must deal, and I think is a very nicely targeted one or sharp one, from also having worked and working in an AI company, is on documentation, for instance, right? So the amount of documentation you have to provide, not just for the market or your potential customers, but also for the public and for the authorities when it comes to commercializing a product, embedding a foundation model, or just probably a foundation model as such, right? And I think it's super sharp because if you are currently working within the AI space, you realize that we are starting to have, since already some years ago, very nice market-driven or even community standards arising when it comes to documentation. As you probably know, what we call model cards or data cards, data sheets, even within Hugging Face for one of the last large language models we developed. It was one for code generation called Star Coder, the result of a partnership between Hugging Face and ServiceNow. We developed a new concept of card called governance card, where basically we were explaining to the audience how did we deal with governance at every single step of the LLM development process, right? Probably these type of documentation mechanisms are not just a requirement within the EU AI Act, but also become a standard, and you're already using them, and you can already leverage them when compliance or the compliance time will come. I think even in the last proposal of the European Parliament, model cards are explicitly named once, which is super important within one of the recitals. I think it's close to open source on the recitals 12A, BC. So it's very important, and I think this is my last point to realize, also back to the last question, how the top-down approach on regulating AI with hard law and the bottom-up approach, so basically governance approaches to AI from the market, are nowadays at an intersection, right? So they are nowadays at a crosspath, And this crosspath is forming organically kind of a really nice governance interface where the regulator and the community are engaging. And for instance, just this example of naming already a community-driven tool such as model cars in regulation is like, for me, the perfect example of we are achieving this kind of interface.
Yeah, I will complement it a little bit with a broader picture on the AI Act, because we as Parliament, I think, made really good work, cross-party agreement on it when it comes to the AI value chain. Carlos was now speaking mainly about the top upstream providers, so developers of foundation models. And yeah, as he said, there we have this Article 28b in the Parliament, 4a in the Council's proposal. I think in the end, companies like OpenAI will face certain requirements to do testing, produce documentation for downstream actors, and so on and so on. Let's see how far we are going. Most other foundation models, I think, will just need to provide certain documentation things, and model cards there will play a major role, this I'm sure. Then all other actors in the value chain, like companies that is producing a data set, or other components that developers of downstream AI systems are then using, those companies also play a role in the AI Act by being obliged to cooperate closely with the other actors. So it's really a little bit like joint controllership in the GDPR or similar things. So we just want that the value chain is working a little bit better together, that we don't have this market concentration problem, that certain companies do not like to share information. This we really want to prevent. And then the third layer in this value chain would be then, as I said already, the high-risk AI system provider, and those companies, we mentioned it already, need to fulfill human oversight, the stop button again, transparency there, especially instruction to use. You have a lot of criteria in Article 13, paragraph 2, and you need then to fulfill and put this all in the instruction to use for the deployer. In technical documentation, you have a lot of points about the architecture of your AI system and so on. On data governance, it's a lot about how to prevent biases, discrimination in your data set, and so on. So rather clear examples. And then if you go further down in the value chain, the deployers, so other companies mostly that are making use of this high-risk AI system, even them are included, because they need, for example, to channel back that there's a problem. If there's, for example, a small incident, they need to fulfill human oversight by putting competent people in this position. They need also to regular install updates when it comes to cybersecurity and so on. So they do not have a lot of obligations, but we really wanted to make sure that the whole value chain is working together with the end goal to make AI safe enough so that people and companies are having enough trust to use it, to face also an AI system, and so on.
Mm-hmm. And then feel a bit safer as well every day when using AI systems.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we already kind of answered this question, but maybe it's here again as well. So because, I will just read it. It's that giants have the market edge of developing faster without AI compliance. So, but now the development is also slowed down because you have to be compliant, and not every company will have a Carlos who will help us. How can a new startup try? So basically, I think the worry in this question that I see is that you'll have this gap becoming bigger and bigger on what is possible for a startup who wants to develop their own LLM for whatever, to be able to join the giants.
Yeah. So I think when I joined Hugging Face, I joined Hugging Face with other colleagues basically to start this kind of regulatory policy and strengthen the governance efforts. So like 1 year and a half, 2 years ago, we were a bit this example of, well, Hugging Face, huge startup, but in any case, a startup, right? So I think I really get the point of, if you're a startup, to hire someone to do public policy or regulatory strategy is a luxury, right? So you don't need this guy for the time being. You need an ML engineer, you need a sales guy, you need something very, very, let's say, essential to the startup, and public policy is not there yet, right? But at the same time, you need to start thinking about compliance. Probably you have one head of legal or one lawyer, but the head of legal is with corporate, with M&A, with hiring contracts, other things, right? So I think, as I was mentioning before, just the EUA Act deserves from you one pass. Just give it a read and basically do this kind of exercise of, okay, what do I know already from AI research, or even academic community, the science community when it comes to AI, that I can spot in this text, right? I was basically referring to model cars. Okay, I know model cars. You normally work with model cars. If you are a serious business, whenever you use a model from Hugging Face or replicates, I don't know, GitHub, etc., you check the quality when it comes to the documentation of this model, right? Do the same for, first of all, you, and then for your potential POC testers or users. Basically, invest a lot in documentation, because then documentation from an ML, let's say, or model car perspective is going to serve you to be compliant with the EUA Act. I give you another example, for instance, Article 13 and Annex 4, dealing with also kind of documentation and transparency related obligations. These kind of requirements are pretty straightforward, and all these requirements within Article 13 can be found in a high quality model card at Hugging Face, and I can later on facilitate the space I created with a colleague there. We basically wanted to validate the hypothesis, and this is why I give you this example for those who cannot afford yet a counsel or a head of legal in your startup. I wanted to validate the hypothesis that within a model card, there is a lot of information that can be used for compliance with very specific provisions of the EUA Act, right? In this case, Article 13. So with some lines of codes, basically, we created an automatic compliance checking. So it is a space in Hugging Face where you select the model card, you upload the model card, and you are going to have instantly a compliance checking with check cross on the Article 13 of the EUA Act, right? And this is something that is in Hugging Face. You have the code there, so you can even, build on it and create a super nice EUA Act compliance scalable thing, right? So this is just an example. So you have already the tools available. It's about you also to this kind of small effort to really identify how to leverage the tools you have there. And they finish with another one, which is basically also evaluation benchmarks, which, as you know, these are like the next big thing nowadays within the community. Evaluation benchmarks come from academia. They are not made for the industry, and even every single business has their own metrics and their own definition for the metric. And probably they will become, I hope, an EU AA standard. But again, evaluation benchmarks are going to be another thing also when it comes to regulatory compliance. And you are the experts about this, and you are the experts about the model cars, right? Not the regulator in this case, so you can leverage this.
Yeah, maybe also to complement again, because I completely agree with everything Carlos said. I think one lesson that companies should have learned from GDPR is that when GDPR became applicable in 2018 in May, many companies were shocked and were realizing just 1-2 months before, oh damn, now I need to do a lot of stuff and I didn't prepare anything and so on. And as Carlos was saying already, now there is a lot of information out there. There are also trade associations and other organizations willing to help, especially smaller companies, do engage in those fora already now. Buy or invest some money to get at least one person that is helping you with AI Act compliance. I don't know if the DPO in every company has enough free time to do now on top also the AI Act and all the other laws that the Parliament and the Commission are now initiating. But I think even smaller companies need at least a small team now of compliance people that are helping them. And then a second point that I really want to make, this whole system, again, if we want to prevent GDPR 2.0 problems to arise, will only work if member states are investing enough in their enforcement bodies. And if there is a good public-private cooperation. So companies and the member states need to work together. Member states will always lack really good experts, because if you're a good deep learning expert, you can earn 10, 20, maybe even 100 times as much as money than working in the Spanish government, or let's go to the east in the Bulgarian government and so on. They even have much more money constraints, meaning they all lack knowledge, but in a good way, they want to talk with you because they need your input. And this, I think, companies could use a little bit, that they now make a meeting with a ministry, with whoever is responsible for the AI Act in 1-2 years, and are already now starting the dialogue with them. And I know, for example, in Germany, from our 16 states, Baden-Württemberg in the south is extremely good connected with companies, the Data Protection Authority, and already on AI in this dialogue. They now try, together with startups in, I don't know, let's say in robotics, how are you in the future covered by the AI Act, what you can do, how to look around and find some best practices and so on. And I think, if you do all those things, you probably do not need to worry too much about the AI Act.
Mm-hmm. And as long as we're on we were talking about the national authorities, what's actually the role of national authorities in the transition to comply with the AI Act? Do they have anything to do with this? Should they be giving more information? How do you see this, or how is it planned at least?
So this is one of the biggest points of dispute between myself and the European Commission, because the Commission is saying we don't have money, we don't want to be blamed in the end if we are writing guidelines and there are some problems. I'm saying I want to avoid GDPR, that you have 27 different guidelines, 27 different understandings of definitions. So Commission, you need to write harmonized guidelines. Let's see who wins in the end, if I win or the Commission is winning. I hope I'm winning, because again, otherwise we have a huge mess in this. So if I'm not winning, it would, the result would be that the Spanish or the Portuguese National Competent Authority, and first, probably all member states will assign different competent authorities. In France, it will be the Data Protection Authority. In Germany, maybe cybersecurity or competition. In other, something completely different. And of course, then already from your mindset, you have a complete different understanding of AI. And this now going to the guidelines, guidance, and so on, would then mean that probably in France, the focus of those papers would be much more connected to privacy concerns than in Germany and others, which then leads to the problem that if you as a company want to be active on the whole internal market of the European Union, you would need to build different products and services and so on, and have a complete fragmented product line. But again, this is why it's also so important that companies all over Europe are already engaging very closely with those enforcement bodies in order, if it's not the Commission, in order to force them to have a kind of streamlined approach.
All right, so I see on the clock we just have a little bit of time left. So I have maybe one question, and it's a bit related with also what happened with GDPR, and I think that was a positive thing. As soon as it was released, it was not only the European companies that had to implement it, but anyone who wants to deal with anything in Europe. So basically, it was a global thing, and after that, you could see the consequence also in the US and other markets. You start having a version of the GDPR. Do you see that the same might happen with the EU Act and Europe also being as a front runner into regulation space at least?
From my perspective, working at the industry, I think you already can take a look at it. I think this past year we had the EU Act, and suddenly there are 2 jurisdictions quite advanced right now, also aside the EU, the UK, as you may know, and the other one is Canada with their proposal, which is the Bill C-27. So these 3, I would say, with the EU are like the front runners. Of course, you have the US at the federal level. They are basically evaluating how they would impact, or they would have a role within regulating AI. Israel also is placing a lot of efforts. South Korea, they also have a first approach to a regulation. So I think, yes, the EU definitely is having like the main leading role when it comes to regulation.
Yeah, I think exactly this. So we saw already that the European AI Act is kind of dominating now the international discussions, and we are motivating a lot of regions and countries, as Carlos was saying. I would say after the AI Act is adopted, it's right now maybe 50-50 or maybe a little bit better chance that there is a Brussels II effect also on the content, because it really depends if we in the end strike the right balance. Because there I'm convinced only if we in the European Union strike the right balance and still allow or push promote the development of AI systems, but at the same time protect fundamental rights and so on, then other regions will say, well, there it's working well, so probably at least I'm doing cherry picking, like with the GDPR, like in California, for example, where they didn't took the whole GDPR and copy-pasted it, but those parts that are making sense in California. And in this positive scenario, then I think we will see this quite a lot, that other regions taking over at least those parts that are working well. And I think, this means probably that many will observe now very, very carefully what is happening here and, then make their conclusions.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much both. We're a bit out of time. Unfortunately, Kai has a flight to catch because tomorrow there's still some very important negotiations on the AAU Act. But Carlos will be around for today, so feel free to catch him and ask him any question. And thank you for you both. Maybe a big round of applause for both of them. Thank you very much.